Good afternoon, team. It's Brian Stevens. It's just hitting 12 o'clock. We're going to start in about 30 seconds. I'm seeing people still click on and join in. We've got a pretty interesting series today. We're having a good, vigorous conversation. We do a little pre-launch to make sure that we understand the run of the show that Amy Daniels and the Chamber team put together. And mental health and the topic we're going to cover today is just, we've been talking a lot for the last couple months about the technical aspects of what to do in this. I hate the word uncertain time. Challenging time is probably a better word during these challenging times, but the mental health of you and your team is really important. I took my first full weekend off, a Saturday and a Sunday off, since all this started last weekend, and I feel better, and I bet my team is pretty happy about it too, because I'm a lot less fussy. And so we brought some real experts in today to talk about that. So I'm pretty excited to hear about, they've got an interesting slide deck, and they do, of course, want questions. So if you're new to the program, if you shake your mouse a little bit, you'll see a toolbar come up. I'm going to get mine up right now, and it has Q&A, and you can start submitting those questions, and I'll do my best to get to as many as we possibly can. So this will conclude our series for May. We're going to take a couple weeks off in June, reset, and then I anticipate continuing to do these with the Chamber because we're getting a lot of value. I think we're providing a lot of value. I'm getting a lot of value out of it. And we've actually got new Chamber members coming on during this time that want to get this knowledge and information. So in the next week or so, if you've got a really good topic that you're interested in knowing, email me, Brian, at casaps.com or your Chamber representative, and they'll get it over to us. So yeah, I'm Brian Stevens with CASA Public Strategy. I'm thrilled to volunteer to sit on the board of your Memphis Chamber, and I'm also the chair of the Small Business Council. So let's kind of start jumping right into it. And of course, none of this would be possible without our awesome partners, Waddell and Associates, to give us our director and producer, Lainey, over here that runs this show, and then iBank for making sure that it's available to everyone. And we have Linda Barnes, who's been with us several times today. So Linda, if you could come up pretty quickly, that would be great. I still can't see you yet. So let's, technical issues all the time. So are you there yet, Linda?
Can you hear me? Because
I've got you now. I've got you now. Yeah. Hey, thanks so much. And I know that you've been just dealing with so many issues. It's always good to have you come back on and tell us what's going on over at Independent Bank.
Yeah, well, living through the stress of it quite often is what bankers do. So I first want to share my thank you to everybody who has joined us today. And on behalf of the bank, we are thrilled to be a part of this organization, the Small Business Council for the Memphis Chamber. Early on, I sent out an article that had a list of easy things to do to kind of help your stress level. And some of my favorites were listen to music, eat right, exercise, even if it's a minute, getting up and walking around the office and, and taking a deep breath. But a couple of my favorites were laughing. And I don't know that in today's environment, we're allowing ourselves to laugh enough. So I encourage you to try to figure out who you can talk to that's going to cause you to laugh. But then another one was talk it out with a friend. Independent Bank wants to be that person that helps your stress level. Talking it out with us as a friend, a partner in your business. So don't forget to reach out to one of our branch team members, our commercial lenders, our private bankers. We're very ready to help talk it out with you if anything financially, on the financial side is concerning you through these challenging or uncertain times. I look forward to hearing from Quintin and his team, and I turn it back to you, Brian. Thanks again.
Thanks, Linda, and thanks for making this program open to everyone in the entire community. Pretty cool of you all. My mental health break is I bring one of my dogs, and that's been a lot of fun. So I'm going to introduce Quintin, who's going to turn it over to his team. Quintin is, I don't know where to start with Quintin. He's been around and fighting for this community for years on different big issue campaigns to make the city of Memphis better. And then he turned to private practice several years ago and went to Cigna Healthcare, where he's a sales vice president over there. And so he's been a long-term friend, not just of the chamber, not just to Brian Stevens, which is the most important to me, but also to this entire region on some of the initiatives. And I can't even begin to think about all the things he's been involved in have been game changers when he was with government. So Quintin, I know we don't have you on video, but you're going to introduce your team. We're going to go in and share Tom's screen right now also. So if Tom, Jennifer can go ahead and unmute themselves and turn on their videos. Quintin, thanks for being here. Thank you for providing us some excellent team members to talk about mental health. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Can everyone hear me?
You're
Thanks,
golden.
Brian.
You're golden, brother. Go ahead.
Great. So good morning, and thanks for that warm introduction, Brian. As Brian indicated, I'm Quintin Robinson, Mid-South Market Vice President for Cigna Health. And today, I want to just thank the Chamber and all of our friends at the Chamber for giving us this opportunity to speak with you, the Small Business Council. We certainly know that this is a very timely topic when you're talking about stress and mental wellness, especially considering what we're all experiencing currently with the COVID-19 pandemic. So we believe the information shared today will be of great benefit to you, your employees, and significant others. And with that, I'm going to introduce our presenter, who's none other than Mr. Tom Heritage. Tom is Behavior Client Strategist with Cigna. As Director of Client, as a clinical account manager, Tom acts as a subject matter expert to Cigna sales teams, supporting new business managers, client managers, and market leadership within the sales organization. He possesses an in-depth knowledge of advanced market issues and Cigna's behavioral health products. He partners with behavioral operations to maintain a working knowledge of all clinical, healthcare professional, and operational processes necessary to support clients and sales teams. Really fortunate to have him within our organization, and this is his second time presenting here in Memphis. Back in the fall, we gathered a group of around 30 first responders from local fire, police, and EMS services, where Tom had an opportunity to come in and talk to them about mental wellness, EAP services, resiliency. And we left that meeting with a lot of really aha moments from the professionals, the first responders that attended, and they were so pleased with the gathering that we scheduled some follow-up events. So glad to have Tom presenting to us today. And when we get to the question and answer session, we're going to have Jennifer Davis also participating. She's our Director of Client and Customer Engagement. Jennifer manages a team of consultants who work directly with clients here in the local market, helping them evaluate present health programs and assist in formulating plans for future programming. So we're also fortunate to have Jennifer for our team. So we'll go to the introduction and turn it over to Tom.
Well, thanks, Quintin. I really appreciate that kind introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and make sure everybody can see the presentation. Okay, and just to add a little bit to that introduction, just for some context, my name again is Tom Heritage. I'm a licensed professional counselor by trade, and I've been in practice for going on 30 years, which is, I hate to say that. Every time I say that, I feel a little bit older. And I've been with Cigna for 17 years, and I started out in our behavioral operations and have really enjoyed my time at Cigna, and particularly being able, in my current role, to be able to support the different markets across the Mid-South and Texas and Georgia. and share, what is something that's very passionate to me, and that is mental health and mental well-being. And so today, as was mentioned, it is so relevant for us to be talking about the topic of mental well-being and mental health, given the amount of stress that we've all been exposed to, as we have been working through our response to COVID. It has created unique demands on everybody, and everybody is, to some degree, having to deal with that additional stress. In the behavioral world, we're already predicting that the impact of that stress, we're going to start seeing that real impact in the next few months. People today are in the midst of it. They're kind of in that survival mode. And so as far as reaching out for help and really the emergence of the impact, we're not seeing that immediately. But we anticipate in the next few months that people, as things reopen, as people start dealing with the challenges that are associated with reopening, that we're also going to start seeing increased presentation and an increased need for help and helpers. And so that's part of what our presentation today is what can I do? So not only are we going to talk about recognition, we're going to talk about how can I respond? So not only for myself, but for others that might be struggling, that I have relationships with or I have contact with. And one of the dynamics that we have all had to deal with is the increased isolation as a part of this response. And Cigna has done a couple of studies. We released our latest update on our loneliness study from our 2018 version. And those results are telling us that even before this, the COVID crisis occurred, the loneliness epidemic was getting worse. The results from our first study in 2017, measuring against our 2018 study, we're seeing an increase in the number of people who are reporting and scoring on the loneliness scale as lonely. And so we know that increasing isolation only contributes to that. And so, like I said beforehand, 3 in 5 people were scoring as lonely. And 2 in 5 people were reporting that they lacked any meaningful relationships, any connectedness in their life. And so, the unique challenges of being remote and dispersed we know is also increasing the loneliness in our communities. And just for some reference, so we say, well, why is loneliness even something that we pay attention to? When we look at the negative health impacts of loneliness, it is equal to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we all know the negative health impacts of smoking. And so just to put that in context a little bit, that's why we pay attention to that. And again, that's why when we're talking about mental well-being and mental health, we have to pay attention to issues like that as well. So as we get started, this is kind of a summary of what we're going to talk about today. Life. Life happens, and things like the COVID crisis, they are unpredictable. They just are things that happen, and we all have to find ways to deal with the stressors that come along with that. And so on the right-hand side there, you see our definition today of stress. It's a psychological and physical response to a person's actual or perceived experience that their resources are not adequate to cope with their life demands or pressures. And there's a side note there, it says that's intensified by having little support or resource. And so, when we're thinking about stress, we really want to, start off with, it's something we all deal with. And I'm sure you've all heard the saying that we're all in the same boat. And I read somewhere, this is an unknown author, I read this, and I thought it was very powerful that speaking to that saying of we're all in the same boat, it calls out that, we're actually not all in the same boat. We are all in the same storm, but each of us individually are in our own boats. And the condition of our boat and how our boat is equipped is different for each individual. And so that really, as we're thinking in terms of mental health and interacting with people and helping and eventually getting to a place where how I might be a help to somebody dealing with a mental health issue, it's important to have that compassion and that realization that says, I don't know everything that's going on with this person, and I can't expect them to have the same resources and abilities that I might have at my disposal. And so when we look here, we're all dealing with mental wellness, and it can be impacted in many ways. The life challenges, obviously, we're all facing that. And how we cope with the stress that comes our way really can play a significant role in maintaining our physical and mental well-being. And so for all of us, increasing our awareness and increasing our ability to be supportive is one way that we can make a difference in the lives of the people around us, as well as in our own lives. So, we mentioned in the definition that there's a connection between the physical and the emotional. When we talk about well-being and health, we can't separate mental health and physical health. So there's that mind-body connection that we are all aware of. And I think, and if you think about it in your own experience, I think you all can kind of relate to, increased stress, and stress in itself is a driver in many conditions. So we've listed out a few there for example, and I'll just call out a couple. So pain. So if you have had any experience with somebody who has a pain condition like a rheumatoid arthritis or a chronic pain issue, you know that increased stress in their life tends to also increase the level of symptoms that they have in their other condition. Same for like digestive problems. So somebody who has an ulcer, clearly we know the connection between increased stress and ulcers. So again, our body is responding to stress and how we manage it. So we also see depression on there, obesity, and skin conditions. So again, just calling out that so many times the very first sign that we see of somebody struggling with a mental health condition or an emotional issue is that we see an increase in their physical symptoms. And so being aware of that, paying attention, and knowing that maybe that's something to pay attention to as I'm thinking about how I might help. So when we talk about mental health in the workplace, and this is not only in the workplace, obviously, this is people in the adults in the United States. 1 in 5 adults in the United States and 1 in 5 of the employees that you're dealing with will experience a mental health condition in a year, in any given year. And if we call out depression, we're going to use depression as an example because it's the most prevalent and typically the most costly, and it's has become the number one driver of disability claims in our country. So when we talk about depression, 10% of the employee population is taking time off of work directly related to depression. And on average, 36 days are lost each time there's an episode of depression in an employee. And then we add to that 50% of people with depression are untreated. And you just kind of let that sink in. Half of the people who are dealing with this particular mental health condition aren't seeking treatment for that. And one of the reasons that people aren't in treatment, obviously they're part of the population that's undiagnosed. They don't know that what they're experiencing is depression. It may be concurrent with a physical ailment, and so they're not recognizing that the depression is a part they need paying attention to. They may think it's part of being ill. But also, there's the dynamic of stigma. And I think that's, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about stigma around mental health. And so what is stigma? So stigma, I'm just going to read a little bit of this to you. So stigma is the phenomenon whereby an individual with a particular attribute is deeply discredited by his or her society and is rejected as a result of that attribute. And so we think about that, we plug mental health in there. So somebody who has a mental health condition is discredited by his or her society and is rejected as a result of that attribute. And we know that stigma is prevalent. We know that in our society, stigma around mental health conditions, seeking help for mental health conditions, even admitting that I have or need help for a condition is prevalent. And that second statement there, stigma is a process by which the reaction of others spoils normal, healthy identity. So my ability to reach out in a healthy way is somehow hindered by stigma. And part of what we want to do for ourselves and for others is to challenge stigma. And so when you just for a minute, I just ask you to kind of think about, when I say mental health or mental health, behavioral health condition, what are some of the words that you think of that come to mind? What comes to mind? How do you describe a mental condition? And just think about that for a second. And if words like crazy, weird, scary, wacko, I mean, there's just a variety of words. And the words that we use is many times a significant driver of stigma. And so we want to be careful about how we talk about mental health conditions because we want to encourage people, because again, we understand the connection that it is part of our overall health and well-being. We all are attending to it, or to some level, and we want to encourage people to seek out help when they need it and to do it in appropriate ways. But stigma is very powerful. Stigma occurs both externally and internally. So there's public stigma. So you think about those words and that came to mind. And how many times the attitude that is present in our society really puts a negative spin on having that need for mental health or having a mental health condition. And so what does it do for somebody who's struggling? How does it might impact them seeking care? And so the public stigma, again, those things that are happening in a societal level may lead to avoidance. I don't want to get labeled. I don't want to admit that I need that kind of a prescription. I don't want to seem weak or crazy. And so again, that avoidance of addressing what is just a routine health need. It's just something that we need to understand is as routine as any physical ailment that we can seek treatment for as well. But stigma happens on a personal level too. So when I internalize those stereotypes or those negative attributes or words into my own thinking, I can become the barrier. I can be the one that's driving the stigma in my own life. So I say I shouldn't need this kind of help, or this means that I'm weak, or it may cause me to isolate or actually remove myself from people who would be helpful otherwise. So so we've talked so far. Okay, mental health conditions, they're prevalent. They're happening around us. Stigma is a contributor, and I'm going to learn those ways to not contribute. But how do I position myself to help? Because particular as we're talking about reopening as a country, and our communities are kind of working through that process. Like I said, we know that it's going to create more stressors in people's life, and we can anticipate that people that have these conditions, we're going to start seeing more symptoms arise. Ourselves individually, we know that we're dealing with more stress, and we're going to need to identify what are effective ways for me to manage that stress for myself. So how might I be more aware, and how can I be of help? And so as we start talking about, how do I position myself to be a helper, be a resource in these times, we're going to talk about 3 R's. So if you leave today, you can think about 3 R's. So the first one is recognize. The other is second is reach out, and the third is resource. And all of these, I say we're going to talk about 3 R's, and now I'm going to tell you there's a 4th R. And that 4th R, all of these things occur in the context of relationship. And really the most powerful tool that you have in being a helper is relationship. And really how you pay attention, how you interact, and how you use that relationship is really key to being positioned as a helper. So let's talk about each one of these individually. So recognize. So what are we talking about when we say recognize? So it's noticing and understanding changes in behavior or mood. What are the signs and symptoms that somebody might be struggling with an emotional problem or a mental health condition? Difficulty concentrating. You're seeing excessive worry, being emotionally upset, uncharacteristically withdrawn. That's going to be a difficult one to notice in today's world, because we're all isolating more. But paying attention and seeing, noticing if somebody is avoiding, somebody being tired, complaints of sleep problems, and then inability to carry out daily activities. So these are some of the common signs and symptoms that we want to pay attention to. And again, like I said, it's not only in others, it's paying attention for myself. So if I recognize, these things are happening, maybe it's time for me to pay a little more attention to my emotional well-being. How am I intentionally managing stress? And we're going to, at the end here, kind of talk about a few tips to leave you with, very simple things that you can do in maintaining your emotional well-being. So that's recognize. Reaching out. So finding the words to open a conversation. And sometimes this is the most difficult part. I think we've all been conditioned. Again, the part of that stigma in our society is really this is something that we shouldn't talk about, or only people who are professional should really step in. This is not my place to be an intervention or to be a resource for somebody. And really, that's something that we need to challenge. So something as simple as a conversation.
Hey, Thomas, I want to jump in. We've actually got a few. I want to jump in with one issue. Last week we had a labor and employment attorney on, and I'm going to actually put on my formerly known as employment law hat that I used to practice years ago. I'm a little outdated, but this reaching out concept, I get that this is really vital with our friends and our pals that we see out there. And I love the idea of reaching out with no judgment. The issue is, in a company, though, you got to be a little bit more delicate about starting to go to employees or coworkers and basically, I notice you're having some mental health issues. How does Cigna actually deal with, I know I'm not trying to ask you for legal advice or anything, but how does Cigna actually, from a process standpoint, deal with employees they think may have a mental health issue? And mind you, this is not legal advice. I think before you start to do this, you probably, as the viewer, should bake this in a little bit more. But what does Cigna do about this, Thomas?
Well, and again, you're right. I mean, by no means are we trying to promote a particular policy or procedure at this point. We're talking about, how can we increase overall awareness? And as an organization, I think, every organization empowers its managers to interact with their employees. And it's within those interactions, it's something as simple as saying, hey, I noticed you seem to be struggling today. Do you want to talk about something? Can I be of help? Again, not positioning myself as the solution, and also not positioning myself in a place where I'm expressing a diagnosis of any kind. Just simply expressing concern. And I think that's, I don't think anybody has a policy or a liability in expressing a concern. And I think that's really where we want to stay. Now, obviously, as a manager, having tools and resources available if you really believe that there's a significant concern. So many times we're going to, organizations are going to have employee assistance programs in place to specifically address these kind of concerns, and the ability to make referrals to an employee assistance program.
So Thomas, I'm gonna let you kind of keep going on with your
Sure.
with your presentation. I do want to address one question that came up, and I'm definitely going to hit these others too. But one question that came up, I'm not going to ask you to answer, but I want to clarify for everyone. Can you ask an employee what their mental health diagnosis is? And what Alan Crone was talking about last week is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think that depending on the number of employees you've got to be very delicate about that, because it could get you into a situation of having to provide a reasonable accommodation about that. So I giving you the legal advice aspect of this program is I probably wouldn't ask that question. If they bring it up to you, there are certain mental health issues that are certainly an Americans with Disability Act qualifying illness. Now, with our company, we get into people's, we want to take care of, I mean, I told people that they had to go off and go running and go exercise and get out of the office even when they were trapped at home to get those mental health issues. So we watch it, but you're right. I don't get into diagnose issues with them. So keep going on, and I'll jump into some of these other questions as we go. Thank you.
Sure. So again, I think for the context of our discussion today, really, how do I leverage the relationship that I have to express, again, I've noticed something, and I'm not going at it in a way that says I've drawn a conclusion that you are having a mental health issue. I'm just saying I've seen some signs and symptoms, and I was kind of saying that within myself, and now I'm reaching out. And again, part of that is just expressing my concern and saying, from a human to human perspective, I've noticed something, and if you want to talk to me about it, I'm available. And I think that's really the point that we want to make here, is that reaching out is absolutely not something that says I am now going to become the resource to address whatever issue you might be having, but I've noticed and I care. And then the final R is resource. And so again, this is how do I, if somebody discloses to me and says, yeah, I am struggling, have I made myself aware of what resources I have available to me, whether that be on a community level, whether that be understanding what are the different professionals that somebody might outreach and to get help. Do I know the difference between a licensed mental health clinician and do I know the difference between a counselor and a psychiatrist? And how do I steer people? And again, so this is something, even as simple as, do I understand what's included in our employee's medical plan? Do I know what resources are there? So, when we're talking about resources, this is the piece where I might have to do a little homework beforehand and say, what am I aware of, and how might I increase my awareness of the things that are in my available to somebody who's struggling. At Cigna, and this is just a little commercial here. It's Cigna. We've developed a relationship with the National Council for Behavioral Health and around mental health first aid. They're developers and the distributors of mental health first aid. And this is a program where you can actually go and just like the name implies, you can learn the initial steps of identifying, responding, and what resources are available. And so this is one option. This is something that we're very happy to have the partnership with them, and that we can actually offer trainings in mental health and certification in mental health first aid for individuals who want to spend a little more time and feel a little more equipped to respond to people who are struggling. And finally, as we kind of wrap this up, so we've talked about mental health issues are prevalent. We've got this barrier of stigma that we've got to help overcome. but we know that people are struggling. We know that circumstances like we're dealing with today are only going to compound the struggles that people are having. And so what can we do to strengthen our own mental health? And many of these things have been mentioned earlier. And so, connecting with others, that's a first step. And again, the challenges of connections, have been one that people have become very creative in how they are connecting. I know we're all looking forward to the day when we can connect in the ways that we did prior to the COVID crisis. Staying positive, gratitude and positivity are very powerful emotions, and it's very difficult to be negative while being grateful. And so practicing gratefulness and positivity, staying physically active, taking care of the basics of all health. So eating right is on here, exercise and sleep, those are the basics, and taking care of the basics apply to all areas of our life. Putting myself in a position to volunteer and help others, taking the focus off of me is a powerful way to improve my mood.
Tom, one of the things that we instituted, we're not super consistent about it, but it was probably a year or two ago. We have yoga. We have in-office yoga sessions Monday afternoons. They start at 4:30 and kind of roll to 5:30 for whoever wants to kind of hang out. I'd like you to really kind of dig into this a little bit, but other than medication, and this was a very specific question, and I think it's a really good one, is what other techniques specifically do you recommend to calm anxiety down other than medication? I'm a firm believer in exercise and that getting enough rest. I mean, there's so much science on, I got to wear a head mask. I was in the Army, and so a little twig breaks and I freak out. So I got to really kind of cover myself out. Any other suggestions about ways to, techniques, so to speak? Like when you say get enough rest, what does that mean?
Yeah. Yes. So like I said, getting enough rest, specifically, that's, the recommendation is 8 hours of undisturbed sleep at a time, and in our world today, many people go, gosh, how am I possibly going to do that? Well, you make a conscious choice to improve your sleep. And again, maybe you don't achieve that all in one step. So being sure that you're allowing yourself to get enough rest. And some of the recommendations around rest specifically are, has to do with these devices that we're all connected to. Being sure that there's a curfew for your devices. You're shutting those off and giving it. It takes. The studies say it takes 30 minutes after being on a device for your mind to really calm down to a point where you can adequately rest and get sleep. Eating well. But as far as stress reducing techniques, there's a variety of them out there, and actually there are a lot of resources available. There's a lot of free applications that'll help you with relaxation, exercises that will help you with different techniques for reducing stress. And it's very individual. I know that there are a lot of people out there that they hear yoga and they have a visceral response to, well, I don't really know that I'm into yoga. I don't think that I want to do that. But, the concept of breathing and taking time and being sure that I'm paying attention to my own body and what's happening, being able to focus on things that are positive, things that are energizing to me, things that are important. Also, what am I exposing myself to? What's happening in my environment? Am I flooding myself with too much information that is contributing to my stress? And do I need to back that off a little bit? Am I surrounding myself with other positive people, other people that are sharing a perspective that I might have that might help me reduce in my stress? And obviously, spirituality is an important part of everybody's life, and it's very individual for everybody as well. So,
So basically, Tom, there's not one thing that's right for everyone. I always like to write down a list of takeaways, but you need to find out what's right for you, and then from an employer standpoint, I try to figure out what's right for the team. Some of them need vigorous exercise. They need accountability. Some of them need a day off, man. I mean, a half day off, go home early, take a long lunch. And so we try to reflect upon that. So really, you got all these grids. I like this. And so people need to try to find out what's right, eating well. Sugar is I know you're not bringing this up, but too much sugar, that's as toxic to your body anyway. We're not going to give a whole class on nutrition here, but
Brian, Brian, you also bring up a great point. And one thing that I just kind of want to add to kind of summarize everything is that you really want to allow yourself to be flexible. And I think if you allow yourself flexibility, you'll both find what works for you. And then as an employer, you'll find what works for your employees. So we're just allowing possibly more flex. We're used to having very rigid schedules and what we do and what time we do certain things. But in the environment that we're in, I think you'll find that you'll tend to deal with your stress a lot better if you allow yourself just some flexibility to give with yourself, but as well as with your employees as well. And that'll help you kind of move throughout these different boxes at different times of the day or the week.
Yeah. So Jennifer, so I get people trying to deal with the mental health without medication, without therapy, but let's now make the assumption that we need to get to therapy. And
Sure.
One of the questions we got are, what free resources may exist for people that don't have the money to pay for a psychologist or psychiatrist to go help? But do you know what resources are available, or either one of you, that free resources to go and have that talk therapy that has really been proven?
So someone listed here in the chat while Tom was talking here, I took a second to glance down in the chat box. So someone did list a reference to Church Health Center. They have lots of need-based. One of the specific questions, Brian, was for someone who maybe doesn't have insurance or not covered for anyone else. So start there, right? They have lots of great resources that can connect you into where. Also, the Tennessee Department of Health, the local Shelby County branch of that, has lots of resources for everyone. And although we're not talking about substance abuse in this communication, but as we talk about mental health, you can't separate out the possibilities of substance abuse and other issues. So the Tennessee Red Line, and I can drop that number down in the chat, but what it is just basically a hotline link local to Tennessee that can help you find resources in the county of your choice for those they are not counselors on the line, but they can put you in touch with counselors, psychologists, addiction, other mental health resources that you may need. So lots of resources and options. And then especially I think what this environment has done for us is to push a lot of these resources more forward, where in the past they may have been buried in some, maybe not.
Jennifer, if you could drop that.
Sure.
I actually found those links because I was familiar with the Church Health Center, but I don't know about all of them. So that would be awesome, especially the Tennessee Department of Health. That's a great, you can just Google that right now. Maybe you can get some resources. Let's jump into a few more questions. I want to go a little long, Thomas, because we got some really good questions here. This one's kind of fun. And they went through anonymous, but I think I know who sent it. So I've heard that many people are having vivid dreams. All right. And they're including this. Me too. I've actually had really vivid dreams lately too, which has been kind of interesting. Will this cause sleeplessness? Is this a problem for the sleep schedule? Do we know why this is happening right now?
Yeah, so actually, when people are experiencing vivid dreams, most of the time that's occurring during REM sleep, which is actually the most restful type of sleep, most restorative type sleep that you're having. But what is driving many of those vivid dreams is the stressors, the things that are on your mind. So when you have particular concerns on your mind, your body is looking for, how do I kind of deal with that? How do I get that expressed? How do I ventilate that? And sometimes the dreams are just a matter of a way of your body kind of in that restorative process, ventilating some of those stressors and concerns. So not always a negative thing.
So don't be alarmed. Don't stress out. It probably means you're getting good sleep. Okay, so I get that, even though I wake up and I go, I feel like I just ran a marathon. But I guess I feel all right. So don't be concerned about it is I think the takeaway there, Thomas?
Yeah, well, and I would say it may reflect a concern that you're not dealing with otherwise. And so if you're having, recurrent themes, that may be a cue to say, maybe I should talk about somebody while I'm awake. Go and talk to somebody about this topic or concern in my life.
Yeah, and there's so many books that are just insane about dreams and dream theory and the Freudian aspects that I studied back when I was a baby psychologist. And I don't believe any of it. I think it's just mass chaos. But anyway, it's not going to disrupt our sleep schedule, which is so important here on your slide. So great. So let's get to one more question. And this is a fear-based question. And so Pamela writes, they're doing all this great stuff. They're sanitizing and providing masks and shields and all the stuff you're supposed to do as employees and customers are returning. We're starting to open up here, Thomas. We're in phase 2 or something like that right now. But now, so they had the stress from the first wave, and then there's the stress of people coming back, and then there's the potential stress of a second wave hitting at some point. And that feels like a very fear-based stress, which is so real and can just, that's what most stress comes from, is fear of the unknown, right? False assumptions appearing real. Well, do you have any suggestions on how to deal with this fear of the unknown and this scary feeling that people may have about the future?
Yes. So actually, the definition of anxiety is that prediction of what might happen, and and particularly in a negative way, and that's part of how we manage this. Obviously, the level of uncertainty, and the lack of consistent information drives this fear and anxiety about what does it mean to reopen? What does it mean to reinitiate contact? And and again, this is one of those areas where we have to exercise a lot of compassion. We have to realize that we're going to be dealing with putting people back in proximity who are falling along the entire spectrum of what they perceive about the crisis. You're going to have people who are there that say, gosh, I've been told, and I believe that every threat that was expressed is real and that every precaution needs to be followed, and I don't really feel comfortable being here. And then on the other end, you're going to have people who are saying, well, gosh, I really never felt like there was much of a threat anyway, and I couldn't really see it, and I see alternative evidence. And we have to allow for people to be where they're at, and understand that, okay, now how do I manage a group of people that are on such a broad spectrum around these stuff? So, common courtesy, reasonable accommodations of one another, and that compassion really need to be the themes that we promote, because the reality is we're not going to have a hard, solid answer that says, here's the truth. And so we can all just revolve around the truth. It's going to be, we have this amount of information and we all have to do our best with what we have. And we try to do the best to be accommodating of one another as we figure this out together. So
Jennifer, I want to help me make sure that I took Thomas's point to heart, because I just had an epiphany, an idea that I have forgotten about during all this, is that I kind of know what the plan is for the company. I know what the plan is for the teammates, and I'm fully prepared to shuttle back down again if we have to. I'm not really stressed out about that because I don't have any fear, because, well, I'm in the driver's seat, right? I have the control. Is that I need to get my whole company together, virtually or in person, and talk about their concerns, talk about their stress points, try to see what we can relieve and be sensitive about it, Thomas. But I would cut my finger as a kid. My mom was a critical care nurse, and she'd wrap it up, and I don't want to hear about it. But you're right. People come at it from different spots. So, but having them just express their concern, hearing it, and kind of talking through, well, we don't know, but we'll handle it. That's kind of what you're talking about too when you mentioned, communicate, right?
Absolutely. I think too, one thing that I've done, and personally as a manager, is that, you have these staff meetings and you're bringing people together virtually, and you're like, okay, someone can't join us, so I'm going to record this call. And that's great. But nobody's going to say anything that they think is important if they think they're being recorded, right? If they know that red light is blinking. So there has to be a time, and you got to, again, going back to allowing them to communicate, say, okay, we've covered everything. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here and let's just talk. What's going on with you guys? How is everyone? If you think about the social connections that we make at the workplace, right? The water cooler and the coffee pot talk. How was your weekend? How are your kids? How are things going? And if you don't get an opportunity to still feel those connections, it can lead to that level of anxiety because you really do feel alone and you don't feel like you know how to process how to move back into the workplace as we start to kind of reopen our lives. So I think maybe taking a second to kind of understand and juggle both your responsibilities as, like you said, as a company and moving us forward, but then taking a second to just press pause, right? Turn off the recording and say, hey, I understand we're all people. What's going on? How are your kids? How are your parents? What are things going on in your life? And I think you'll get a lot of traction. And to also extend the invitation. Hey guys, just remember, if there's something you don't want to talk about here, call me when we're done and we'll chat.
I mean, that's a great, yeah, that's a great point, is to have a follow-up. And I would also say that one of the things that we do to avoid groupthink or the quiet people, to get them out, is I'm going to have everyone write their top stress point down. And everyone's, they can either do it in private. I love that point. I didn't think about that point, Jennifer. That's great. Or they can do it in public. But we want to get everyone to have their stressors out, not just the really loud vocal people.
Yeah.
And so talk with your team, get them to express their concerns, use these mental health pre-medication issues that you've got right here on the screen still, Thomas. I love that. And hopefully Jennifer will post up some additional ideas like the Tennessee Department of Health, so you can get mental health help out there. So we're going to end today because we already went a little bit over what we normally do, but I think this was really very helpful. So I got a ton of really good takeaways. Is watch your team, right? Use those takeaways as far as what should you be looking for. It's cool to be helpful. Making sure that people are taking care of themselves is so vital right now. And then have people express their concerns so you can get it out in the open and maybe not make it quite so scary anymore. And maybe that'll help decrease anxiety. And eat really well and go to sleep. Go to sleep. Don't watch streaming podcasts. Like my daughter's up to like 4 a.m. When I'm getting up, she's still awake. It's crazy. So, hey, thank you to Cigna. Quintin, A+, your pros were fantastic today. Thanks to iBank. Thanks to Waddell and Associate. We're going to have a gap of 2 weeks. So Thomas, you can't join us next week, buddy. I know you want to find the next thing, but you'll have to wait a couple of weeks, but we'll get that posted up. And if you have ideas on topics that you want to have your chamber present, well, shoot them over to Amy Daniels and wear her out. That'll be a lot of fun. So, hey, thanks everybody. And thanks for putting on a great show for us today, Thomas and Jennifer. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.